Legendary former Fox News host Chris Wallace sat down for an interview with Mediaite in which, among other things, he shredded his former network, Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, and election denialism, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, Chris Wallace is somebody that I deeply respect, even though, like anybody else, myself included, he is far from perfect. My vibe of Chris Wallace, having watched him long before I was a content creator when he was the host of Fox News Sunday before Shannon Bream took over after Chris Wallace left, was that Chris Wallace was probably personally fairly conservative. But as even Jon Stewart admitted repeatedly to his face, Chris Wallace was a tough interviewer. He asked Republicans tough questions. He asked Democrats tough questions. And he was better at that sort of thing than anybody on Fox, including anybody there like Bret Baier, Neil Cavuto, Shannon Bream, and others. And his departure in 2022 dealt a crippling blow to Fox's journalistic credibility. And he sat down for an interview with Mediaite. The whole thing is like 45 minutes long. I encourage you to check it out. But I really wanted you to see the segment in which he talks about leaving Fox, why he left Fox, and Tucker Carlson, and this atmosphere of conspiracism and election denialism correlated with the MAGA movement.
Now, you joined CNN in 22.
Yes.
After leaving Fox.
Yes.
You later told the New York Times that your job at Fox became unsustainable, and you pointed to coverage of 2020 election claims and January 6th, in particular Tucker Carlson's conspiracy theories about that day, as an example of something that you couldn't tolerate. How did you get to that point of feeling like it was unsustainable and then leaving Fox?
I don't want to talk about this at great length, but briefly, you know, I never had a problem with conservative opinion. And frankly, I thought during the Roger Ailes days that Fox was pretty good at having a firewall. I mean, I thought it was interesting that Fox would keep somebody like Brit Hume as the anchor on election nights, and if an O'Reilly or Sean Hannity ever got on, they got on purely as an opinion commentator. Frankly, as opposed to some of the other networks, well, frankly, I think of MSNBC with Rachel and Chris Matthews, who at that time were doing it, who I thought were much more opinion, much less straight reporters, and you know they were anchoring election nights and conventions and things like that. So I thought it was kind of a firewall. I thought the firewall crumbled, particularly after the 2020 election. I thought that Fox changed after, frankly, I can point to one specific thing, the call of Arizona on election night in 2020 and the backlash from the viewers and the desertion to places like Newsmax, and Fox changed after that.
Right. Yeah, and we know through the Dominion defamation lawsuit at the time there was a lot of fear among executives that viewers were fleeing to places like Newsmax, and that drove a lot of the coverage to promote Trump's false claims about the election. Now, I should note that you and a number of your other colleagues at Fox on the news side pushed back aggressively and authoritatively and consistently against those claims.
Unsuccessfully.
Unsuccessfully, yeah. What did you make about the way that those claims were covered elsewhere? Did it bother you a great deal that they were being promoted by other people, not just at Fox, but in conservative media?
Yeah, well, look, we're not perfect, the straight news reporters. I mean, yeah. For instance, the right wing was talking about the Hunter laptop, and a lot of people dismissed it. And it turned out that was wrong. It turned out it was that the Hunter laptop was legitimate, that a lot of the stuff that was on it, that people were reporting was on it, in fact was on it, and you know, that we missed a story there. So I'm not saying that the kind of straight news people are always right, but there was a lot of stuff that was just nonsense. I would have been delighted is probably the wrong word, but I would have been hungry if there had been stories of election interference. I mean, it would have been something that, you know, like a ravenous wolf, I would have sat there and chewed over. It just wasn't true. Yeah. You know, there were 60 cases And the only one that Trump or Trump's forces won was on one technicality. The Supreme Court was throwing it out. Federal courts were, state courts, judges appointed by Trump, they were all throwing it out. There was just no there. And, and also January 6th. I mean, I've been in Washington since 1978. And so what's that, 56 years? And my first job in Washington was covering the House of Representatives. So I have a real feeling for the Capitol. And to see the Capitol of the United States being overrun and, Capitol Police being embattled and, as it turned out, being very badly hurt, and the members of this House and the Senate fleeing for their lives, that hit me in a very deep place. And for people to say, well, that was just a tourist, there were just a bunch of tourists, or that was a peaceful protest with a few malcontents, that was nonsense. That was, an attack, an assault on American democracy. Right. And, I just didn't have any patience for that.
Yeah, and I think what was sort of shocking about what happened there is that when you go back and look at Fox opinion coverage on the night of January 6th, it was all very real. It was responding to a horrifying attack. Everyone was outraged about it. And then for some reason in the next couple of weeks, people like Tucker Carlson started downplaying it. And you said that when I mentioned the election earlier, you said that you guys failed to a certain extent. I don't think you failed, but it is true now that despite the fact that news reporters have been saying for years that one, the election was not stolen, and that two, January 6th was an attack, a majority of Republicans believe that the election was stolen. And a lot of them would downplay. I was just watching today on, I think it was CNN, there was a Republican lawmaker who said that Mike Pence wasn't in any real danger on January 6th. Do you have a sense of how that happened, how we went from recognizing that these things were nonsense to now it being almost mainstream, commonly accepted opinion on the right?
Among us, I was going to say.
Among a certain set.
No, I saw a poll. I don't know if how recent it is or how representative, but certainly within the last year, I saw a poll that said that 70% of Republicans did not think that Joe Biden is the legitimate president.
Right.
That's horrifying. I mean, when you talk about why did you leave and why was it unsustainable, I had no problem with conservative opinion any more than I do with liberal opinion. But what I do have a problem with is conspiracy, lies. The truth is non-negotiable. It's not something that you can sit there and shade or in any way play with. And I saw way too much of that happening. And the answer is, look, if you've got somebody as dominant in the public discourse as Donald Trump feeding a story, and then you have that being amplified on a variety of cable networks and internet, platforms, people are going to believe. And in addition to which, it plays to what they want the truth to be. This is where we get back to the danger of choose your own adventure, yeah, where people are watching outlets or reading news sources that are feeding their misconceptions. You can understand. Does it still surprise and shock me? Yes, but I can kind of understand it.
Yeah, and fortunately, there are some consequences to this kind of stuff. Fox obviously had to settle with Dominion for $787 million. Did you feel, I don't want to say vindicated at all when you saw that, but did it make you feel like you had made the right decision potentially leaving Fox?
No, I mean, at
that point,
I'm not so egotistical that I viewed that. I viewed it as, I'm glad to see somebody's paying for playing with the truth,
right,
and for very much breaking what I think is our almost sacred charter, which is to inform people, not to misinform people, and to the degree that that Fox was scared by people leaving to go to the cost of calling Arizona correctly and people going to other more conservative outlets. There's also a cost to lying and
right,
to misrepresenting, and I was happy to see that cost was being exacted.
So the reason I wanted you to hear that full like that entire thing uninterrupted was because, I mean, there was just so much packed in there. We could have stopped for every like 30 seconds. But that is perhaps the most respected journalist to have ever been in Fox's employ, alongside Shepard Smith, who left before Chris Wallace, Brett Baier before he, devolved into the diet MAGA news host that he is. I mean, they were the holy trinity effectively of credible journalism. Neil Cavuto, I think, has stepped up somewhat to try to compensate for their remarkable absence, for the howling abyss, the void left behind by Chris Wallace and Shep Smith. But it was important to hear somebody who was a loyal Fox News host for years, and somebody who interviewed, that man interviewed not only presidents of the United States, Donald Trump, President Clinton, President Obama, and others. He interviewed Vladimir Putin and others, a storied career. And he has recognized that his former network has regressed and devolved into something ugly and conspiratorial and outcome-driven and correlated, like inextricably linked to the MAGA Republican cult, such that he was happy. He celebrated the fact that they had to fork over nearly $800 million as a consequence of their lies. That's a stunning statement all the way around, his recognition that Fox is what it is. And that's how you know that anyone who tells you that Fox is anything else other than a mouthpiece for the Republican Party, a propaganda arm of the Republican Party and whoever its current leader has to be, this is objective, incontrovertible proof that that's exactly what it is. So glad to see Chris Wallace speaking out about this. Glad to see Mediaite pushed him on this to answer, because we haven't heard much by way of Chris Wallace like weighing in on these sorts of things. And I think it's really important to hear from somebody who wasn't just in the employ of Fox, but was one of their star anchors, their star talent. So great stuff. Glad to hear it. Glad to see that we are further vindicated by people who know best from Fox about Fox's transformation. And in the meantime, of course, let me know what you think in the comments.